Jeff Singer, you have been a senior VP, COO, CEO of how many companies? How many companies have you been a CEO for?
Yeah.
Including companies like NASDAQ and several others. In addition to this, you've been on the board for several companies. You're a professor, an investor, an advisor to many different individuals and companies. What role in your career do you feel like you were not qualified for when you got it?
The first time I was CEO. Yeah. So I was at NASDAQ serving as helping create an industry within their product group called the Apparel Footwear Group. And we were very successful there and created a large industry segment for NASDAQ. And I thought, okay, now I'm ready for the big time. And I was asked to be the CEO of a startup. And this is right after the dot-com bubble burst. And so it was a terrible time to be CEO. It was a terrible time to be at a startup. It was a terrible time for all the, we're even in a recession. It was right after 9/11. Anyway, and I just wasn't ready. And, the CEO needs to be able to look around corners. They need to be able to anticipate where the next phase of growth will be, or how to cut costs, or what type of strategy that would sell this product a little bit differently, or how to pivot. And there are just a lot of little decisions that I just wasn't prepared for. I had thought that working at an industry segment as a general manager in a big company like SAP would prepare me to lead a small company. And I was wrong. I just wasn't ready for it. And there were just a lot of skill sets that these CEOs have that I hadn't developed at that time, that first led to a lot of frustration. Second, in the end, I was terminated from my contract, which was one of the hardest things that ever happened in my career.
And how long did it take for them to decide you're out?
2 years.
Okay.
So the first year was great. And then things started, again, I think they kind of knew that I wasn't prepared for the role, and they were mentoring me in all the right things that, a board of directors should do. But then I believed that the company should go one direction. I thought we should sell to one of the larger ERP, we called them ERP software solutions, and they thought that they should develop out the product a little bit more. I presented a plan to sell the company, and they didn't like the plan, and that's when they formally terminated my contract. And I think if I went back and relived it, I would have read the tea leaves a little differently. I would have known how to handle the board. I would have known how to address their concerns. I would have known how to speak their language. I didn't know any of those things. That was all new, and I was a little bit ahead of myself. Maybe they say skiing over the tips of your skis. I was a little bit too far forward. And in the end, I got a lot of learning, and I think I did a lot of good for the company, but I just wasn't prepared for the role.
How could you have learned those things, though?
How could I have learned them? A lot of times people learn those startup things by being in startups. That was my first startup ever. And so by being in a startup, you learn those things. Maybe having been a vice president or a director or started in something right out of college where that was just sort of the known expectation. When you come from a big company, you have a whole bureaucracy supporting you. You have a marketing department, you have a finance department, you have research and development. All you need to do is take that product and push it out there. And there's a lot of established procedures that enable you to be successful. Whereas at a startup, none of that exists. You have to figure it all out, and it's all on your shoulders. And so some of it was just a rush. I love doing it. And some of it I just wasn't prepared for. And as a result, it didn't turn out very well. So, I wasn't prepared for it.
Yeah. I mean, every CEO has to have their first CEO job, right? But I think especially being at a startup CEO, you probably do need the startup experience rather than just being a NASDAQ or SAP. Like, as you were talking about that, I'm thinking back to my Morgan Stanley days where I had one job as part of operations, and then in this specific department, and then on this team, and this was the only thing I did. I was sort of just a virtual, cog in the machine, but also like the conveyor belt in a manufacturing process. Like I'm just repeating the same thing over and over again. to build this virtual product or provide this virtual service. And it's a totally different environment from, being at this mega corporation to these smaller companies like a startup.
The other thing you have with these mega corporations like SAP or Morgan Stanley is brand recognition.
Yeah.
So when you pick up the phone and say, I'm from SAP or I'm from Morgan Stanley, people take your call.
Yeah.
Whereas if you say I'm from a small startup, click, people hang up. Or if you get that email, click or delete.
Yeah.
But it's harder to delete a email from Morgan Stanley. You just have to take a look at it and if they're being serious about it. So all those things combine, to make it very, very difficult if you're not from that world or if you don't have a compelling value proposition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was definitely, even though I didn't love my job at Morgan Stanley, I appreciate now, and even at the time, I saw at the time too, like I was able to get my foot in the door at my next job very easily because, he's coming from Morgan Stanley.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's worth something.
Yeah.
Because they took him on.
Well, when you have a company like Morgan Stanley or SAP or Goldman Sachs, Fidelity, you have those names on your resume. It's like pixie dust.
Mm-hmm.
And you spread that pixie dust and then it opens up doors for the next opportunity.
Yeah. When I was wanting to stay in finance, and I'm, now in more of the tech and insurance space, but asked me a year ago, and I was doing courses on the side to, sharpen my accounting and finance skills. And I was like, I need to work at Goldman Sachs. This is my golden ticket. If I can do some time at Goldman Sachs and, work up the chain there, associate to maybe even VP, 5 years down the line, then I could go anywhere. Got Morgan Stanley on the resume and then some tenure at Goldman Sachs and, a little bit of career progression there. I could have conversations with anyone, anywhere within the finance world.
So why didn't you go to Goldman Sachs?
They didn't want me, really.
Okay, that doesn't help.
And really, like looking back, me at that time, the roles I was trying to interview for, I was wanting to switch industries, go from insurance back to finance. And usually you don't go up a tier, as far as like your salary and all that goes. But the things that I was asking for, I was not quite ready for. Mm-hmm. There's another UVU MBA alumni who was kind of like getting me in the door. But as far as my qualifications at the time, the roles that I was trying to get in the door for were just a rung higher on the ladder than the roles that I really should have taken. But I was looking for a salary bump and, going up on the ladder at the same time as moving to a new industry, which typically doesn't happen, but I'm a Hail Mary kind of guy. So
okay, risk taker.
Yeah.
Yeah. The lateral move is best made for those types of companies and then build political capital once you're there.
Yeah, and looking back, I'm like, well, I probably should have interviewed for the analyst roles rather than the associate roles, because they're just higher expectations on the associate that just doing even the best online courses are not going to prepare you for. You need time with your butt in their seats as an analyst in order to get into those associate roles. Yep,
totally agree.
Or have a master's or doctorate, and I didn't have that
qualification, right?
Yeah. So, no hard feelings, to anyone I was networking with or interviewing with, all good there.
Yeah.
But I think looking back, it would have been more hours and a longer commute, because right now I commute from my bedroom right above us to my office on the other side of the townhouse, and 8-hour days, not 10-hour days at Goldman Sachs downtown. So I'm fine with it.
But there's a real shift though, going to the office again, and I kind of like the camaraderie. I get the whole work from home. I know we're switching topics here and pivoting a little bit, but there is something to be said for camaraderie, for building relationships, for having sort of a vibe in an office.
Yeah.
You do get stuff done at your home office, and I think good companies are recognizing that there is sort of a flexibility that can be offered where maybe Fridays are at home or something like that. But I do think that for people, especially at your level and your stage in your career, having mentoring, having network, having, just people to talk to each day, I think it's good for the company. And I think it's good for you. And even if it causes you to have to commute just a little bit extra every day.
Yeah. And I totally agree. I think for someone, again, straying a little bit more off topic than what I have planned for us today, but for someone who is thinking, I want to go far in finance, especially, you're a finance professor. You've worked a lot of your career at these, finance firms. For someone who wants to go far in a career like in finance, you should be in office. Even if hybrid is the deal, like you should probably go in every day, and you should be building your network. You should be showing up a little extra and showing that you're the guy or girl or whatever. You're the person who's going to get it done, because it does matter in certain industries, especially if you want those mega 6-figure checks, not just 100,000, but if you want to get up to the 200,000-300,000 without being a CEO, if you want these big bonuses and that sort of stuff, if you want to have a high finance career, I do think you should be that person who goes in every day, even if it's not.
Well, it's you don't want to mix the accomplishment with activity, right? So you just don't want to say, well, I've checked all the boxes. I came in every day. I did everything I was supposed to do. Why not promote me or give me the 6-figure salary, right? Because you don't want to confuse activity to accomplishment. However, you're more likely to get the accomplishment if you're in the right environment. You're more likely if you're talking to the right people. You're more likely to understand where the deal flow is. Mm-hmm. And in order to get promoted, you have to have the accomplishment. You have to close the deals. You have to grow the top line. And so in order to do all of that, I think it's your chance of success is far better when you're around the people. When the phone call comes in and you're sitting at to your boss, and the phone call comes in and they say, well, Matt, come on in and let's start working on this deal, versus a person who might be working from home. Yeah. And so that's what I mean. It's like, it's always going to be about accomplishment. Mm-hmm. And at these big banks or any bank in finance, it's always going to be about meritocracy. But, you're more likely to set yourself up for success if you're in the right environment. And I think that probably includes, at least in the near term, being in the office.
Yeah. And I think at the very least, even if people don't understand what your accomplishments are, like let's say they're not your boss or directly ahead of you, not in your department, but their opinion still matters. The VP of some other department, their opinion of you still matters, because they talk to your VP and they also may make promotion decisions. At the very least, they see you in the office early, they see you here late. There should be there probably is an assumption, like they're probably not here loafing. Well,
I went, when I was in New York, I went to the office every day. That was just expected. Right. And I went, I was at NASDAQ and I was a vice president, and Adina Friedman was one of the vice presidents. I think she was even executive vice president at that time, but she was in a different division. I didn't report to her, and we were put on a project together. I was doing some work from my division and she was heading it up from hers. And we just got to know each other. Mm-hmm. By being on calls, by being in the same rooms, by just talking, and then I got to be exposed to all the people on her team and a few other teams. Never would have happened had I been working from home.
Oh yeah,
it never would have happened if I'd just been. You see the people when you see them on screen, but when you're actually with them in the same room, you crack a different kind of joke. Yeah, you shake hands with somebody. You're physically there. The nuance on your comments isn't lost without the body language.
The virtual world is not as good as the in-person world.
It's not. It's on a 10-point scale. It's a 7 or an 8. And a face-to-face is a 10. And anyway, so I got to know her really well. We're actually really good colleagues to this day. She's now the CEO of NASDAQ, a well-deserved position. She's one of the best that they will probably ever have.
Not a divisional CEO.
She is the CEO, and she's a phenomenal CEO. And, I have no doubt that if I had still been there, I would have been one of her lieutenants, but not because of anything, for any other reasons that we got to know each other. We did good work together. We had a lot of respect for each other, and those things happen when you're together, versus seeing each other on a screen and just evaluating someone's email or PowerPoint slide or whatever. When you're actually together, that's when you build a real relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. Like with your, we'll get into some of your professor stuff a little bit later, but your Rate My Professor score is actually a little low. It's 2.8 out of 5. Yeah. And most of those low reviews come from your online students.
Probably in the first year I taught online.
Well, I was looking through some of them today, just, in preparation, as well as a couple of days ago. But some of them are also from recently. But it's just, I don't know. It's tough to grade a person or a professor off of an online experience. Like you have to discount that a little bit.
Well,
You know,
okay, so
you're not
going
gonna-
back to my rate my professor, those all came in probably a few came afterwards, but most of them came in the first semester I ever taught online. And so I didn't even know what I was doing. And so they put out some pretty negative scores, unfortunately. And, of course, there's always going to be someone that doesn't like your teaching style.
Yeah.
That's going to go out there and say, he's the worst person ever. But, for the most part, as I look at my scores internally at UVU, they've always been overwhelmingly positive. But there's always that one person that's going to say, I don't like his style.
Yeah.
And that's the way an organization is as well. You can be the CEO or a vice president or some leadership position. You can be doing all the right things, but there'll be somebody who takes umbrage with what you do or what you say, and you just can't pay attention to that one or two individuals. Now, you do want to improve. You do want to take, things that they say seriously, because there might be some truth to what they're saying, but you're never going to please everybody. And so if I pay too much attention to that, it gets inside your head and you start to do stupid things.
Yeah.
And so I take it as a data point, but nothing more.
Well, speaking more to your improvement and also your days at NASDAQ, you've worked primarily in industries that require a pretty high, at least broadly speaking, a high level of intelligence, a high IQ. It helps to be in your industry. But what role has EQ played in your career development? I've heard you share some stories about when you were at NASDAQ. And so, when did you recognize, like, I can't just be book smart?
So I was at SAP, and I created that division within SAP. And it turned out to be a $250 million division. And I couldn't figure out why I wasn't.
Was that it? It was only 250 million?
I thought it was a lot. Okay. I mean, in fact, we went from the 13th largest. We were 13 out of 13. We were divided by industry segments: so oil and gas, process, retail, consumer products. And we created my industry, which was apparel footwear. And that was 13 out of 13. Wasn't given a big budget. And they said, Jeff, here, see if you can grow and make something of this. So I did, and we made it number 5 at SAP, which was huge. And so we had some really good success there. And I thought, boy, this ought to be able to get me higher in the promotion, or I should be able to get.
Yeah. And I made the company so much money.
I've made the company so much money. And I, because of one of the years, we brought in a lot of revenue. They all got big bonuses, and it didn't lead to a promotion. And so I thought, well, maybe it's not going to work here. That's why I went to the startup after SAP. And then after the startup, I went to NASDAQ, and I realized that the same problems I was having at SAP were happening at NASDAQ. And that's when I looked in the mirror and said, the problem is you. And I just, what am I going to do?
And was it you that looked in the mirror, or was someone else there? Did you have mentors who helped you recognize, hey, we like you, you're making the company money, but this is why it's not happening for you? Or was it all, just self-reflection?
There was, well, at NASDAQ you had your tangible results, how much revenue did you bring in, and, your client retention, and how many clients did you get to switch over from the New York Stock Exchange, how many IPOs, all that kind of stuff. We had all these very tangible measures that sort of went against our performance. And then there were the intangibles that then we would have our 360s and I always, first year I did really poorly on the intangibles, the EQ. And I just thought, well, it's because we went, NASDAQ's going through a major restructuring. And, even my boss said, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And then the second year came back with equally bad results. And I thought, something's wrong here. And then I just realized that I could get the results, but I wasn't getting the promotion. I wasn't getting the respect out of my team, and I thought, I'm doing something wrong. And I had the impression that after I took it to I was praying, I was fasting, I was trying to figure out what do I got to do differently, and I had the impression to read 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and that became my business Bible. I mean, everything that Stephen R. Covey said to do from chapter 1 on. I did. And it said, do this for 30 days and do that for 20 days or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
I did it. And that really was the beginning of making some changes, because I started becoming a more empathetic manager. It wasn't always just about the results. It was about the people. And then I had a number of life changes personally that sort of caused me to reflect. I won't go into all that here, but it really sort of brought me a little bit lower than I'd been. And so combined with some life changes with that book and a few other things, I realized that people were not the means to an end. People are the end.
Mm-hmm.
And people want to be respected and loved and cared for, whether they're in your personal network or your business network. They want to be loved. And so I decided to start really loving my employees in all the appropriate ways. And
can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
Practically, what does that look like to love your employees?
To treat them with complete dignity, patience, respect, kindness, giving them the benefit of the doubt. I tell the story often of one of the employees. We set goals for the next year, and one of the goals, he had all the right goals on his sheet, and then he said, there's one more goal that I'd like to run by you. He goes, I don't know if it's a goal or not, but my wife and I are struggling, and I'd like to have Wednesday off to take the train early home so that I can take a cooking class with her.
Mm-hmm.
Of course you can do that. And after our meeting,
I mean, of course would every manager have said, of course?
I don't know.
As you say, of course, I'm like, well, I can think of a handful of bosses that I've had.
Maybe not. Maybe not. Especially in Wall Street. This is downtown New York. So pure Wall Street. But I was looking at him. He was telling me what his biggest issue was that was preventing him from taking it to the next level. And it was something that was happening in his home, not happening at work. Yeah. He was a great employee. He was very smart. He was very results oriented. But what was keeping him from truly progressing at his job was something that was happening at his home. And so after he told me, and we developed this relationship, I've been doing the 7 habits. I've been doing everything I could to sort of look outward and be an outward focused individual.
You do.
I said, of course. And after that meeting, I literally, my office was on the 50th floor. And I went down to the 49th floor to the human resources. And I said to our human resources manager, can we help David by paying for this cooking class? I know we have a budget set aside for employee training, but could we put part of this aside towards that cooking class? And how much is it? And I said, I think it's like $1,500 or something. And she goes, sure. Okay. And so I put it towards that. And the feeling between me and that employee from then on changed. And the way I set goals with my employees and the way we had performance reviews and the way we had conversations from that moment changed.
And did he ask you to pay for it? Did he ask the company to pay for it?
No, he didn't ask the company to pay for it. And so when the company, NASDAQ, just paid that extra, it was nothing to them.
Yeah.
That meant everything to him.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, he's become he's still there at the NASDAQ.
Wow.
And to this day, when I call, he's there, and he'll do anything I ask or any request that I make, and actually all the people that reported me. And so, in 2005, I had the lowest internal report, or the internal 360 score, or one of the lowest, or I was in the bottom 10% or something like that. And when I went to Dubai in 2008. I was number 2 in the company. And my boss said, you better check to see if that was done correctly, because that is overwhelmingly high, for you.
I know you,
Jeff. I know you're not that good, right? And so he, we looked at it, and I checked with HR, and she went through all the scores and said, and this is why it's legitimate, and your team really thinks the world of you, And that became, and so the principles that I learned through, and it was really, really hard to go through that change process. But I was just so determined to make those changes. I wanted to make those changes more than I wanted to breathe. I wanted them. I was desperate to make those changes. And so they all my life events and all my work events conspired about the same time to make some fundamental management changes that have guided how I led companies. And at that time, I was then asked to go to Dubai. And I think one of the reasons is because I had become a manager and a leader that the CEO at the time, Bob Greifeld, could trust in the Middle East. And, I often say it's like he wanted someone that he could, he couldn't watch the investment. It was a half world away. And so, is this thing going to be done the way he thought it should be done? And that's when they asked me to do it. And that was a huge pat on the back, if you will. Yeah. But it was sort of a transformational experience that I'm glad I had, I guess, somewhat early in my career. It happened in my early 40s, and it was able to guide the rest of my career since then.
Well, I mean, reflecting on this specific period of growth, and I'm sure you've had many other periods of significant growth, but this was very active for you. It was a choice, and, like you just said, I wanted these changes in myself more than I wanted to breathe. Mm-hmm. That's a choice. It's something you're working at. But what role has luck also played in your career?
Luck? I haven't even thought about that, Matt. Okay.
So, I mean, that could be the answer then, right? Like, well, I mean, none of it was luck. Like, I worked and I chose this right place to be, and then the opportunity came up, but
I have never subscribed to that luck thing. Luck is when opportunity and hard work meet. I just have never thought and hoped for luck, and never even given it consideration. So I'm not sure I can even give you a good answer. Yeah.
Well, I think that's kind of the answer I was hoping for, because I think a lot in my generation, we play a bit more of a victim mentality. That's kind of what we hold. And I don't want to, but I think a lot of my peers do. Like, oh, these other people, they just got that great job. They just got that promotion. Like, if only I were so lucky. And I'm like, I don't know. I think you could get it.
Yeah, I mean, I was super unlucky when I was at SAP and I was struggling getting promoted, and I was super lucky at NASDAQ to get the promotions that I received. Mm-hmm. And so you got to ask yourself, what was that? Was it lucky or unlucky? Yeah. And I agree that there's just so much, in this new generation rising up, an entitlement, and with some, not all, that believe that, they should, if they do the work, they should get the promotion. And what I've learned through my career, it's not a straight line. Mm-hmm. There are other tangible and intangible factors that go into creating that luck, as you call it.
Yeah. It's like people will look at someone's career or someone's business and be like, wow, that exploded on the outside. That's what it looks like, but really it was 5 years of 12-hour days, never taking weekends off, no vacations with your family while you're building this business, and then all of a sudden it took off. But really it was the 5 years of work that made it happen.
Yeah, an overnight success story that took 5 years to create.
Yeah. It's like the movie Hot Rod. I don't know if you've seen it, but the stuntman is retelling the story of when his father died, who was also a stuntman, and he's talking about this crash. And it's like, yeah, my dad, he died instantly the next day.
Okay.
It's a comedy movie.
I haven't seen it. Okay.
But it's, a silly way, but it's kind of the same thing. Like, you blew up overnight, over 5 years of nights.
Yeah. That's the way I think it works for most people in life. Certainly there's maybe fortuitous opportunities that come when you're at a cocktail reception and you meet the right person at the right time, mm-hmm. or you happen to be in a grocery store and you meet somebody. But even then, when you're in the grocery store, at the cocktail reception, either one of these events, it's on your mind is going, you're working, you're thinking, you're being proactive. And so when the right person is in front of you, you know what to say, you know how to handle yourself, you know how to engage the individual properly. And when all those things come together, and if you're not engaged, if your mind isn't going, if you're not working hard, then you're not going to be lucky.
Yeah, it's like my first class with you. I was finishing my undergrad, and I don't remember if you were the only option that semester.
I'll take Jeff Singer because he's the only option.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying, Matt?
I don't remember if you were the only option or not, but I did take the class from you, and that we'll call it luck. But then it was on my part to then sit in the front row and to ask, when I was wanting to go further in finance. I was at Morgan Stanley at that time. It was on my part to ask these questions, not just about the course material, but also how do I get to this next job? What is it really like working on Wall Street? So that I could do my self-reflection of, well, is that really what I want? Should I work towards that?
Yeah.
And I remember asking you one question of, you talk about all these people on Wall Street, your peers and colleagues and everyone you looked up to, and me thinking ahead about my family. I asked you, and I don't know if you remember this, but I asked you, is it possible to have these high finance jobs and still keep your family? And your answer was effectively, it's very hard. Do you still feel that way?
It's hard, but it's possible. I've seen a number of people do it. It requires a commitment on the spouse as well. And typically, these high finance jobs in Wall Street. So for example, I knew analysts that had been in Wall Street that had worked not 24 hours, but probably 18-hour days, 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
Yeah.
For 2 years straight. And they did that because that's what everybody else was doing. And of course, if it was reported in the Wall Street Journal, they'd all deny it. But that's what they all did. And that's what sort of was the known game. And if you were trying to keep a family together with that kind of work commitment, it becomes very, very difficult.
Yeah.
But I've seen it work. I've seen some friends of mine who are younger, who have done it really well, but they can't. It's not something you can keep up for very long. It might be a year or 2 or 3 stretch that you can do that, but eventually that will strain at the chords of your relationship. And
does that change at the higher levels, like managing director, VP? Like, do you get more time to spend with your family?
Yeah, there's a culture that in Wall Street that says, this is what I had to do to get here, and so therefore this is what you'll have to do to get here. Why should you have it any easier than I did?
Yeah.
And so, but once they get to the higher levels, they do get their nights and weekends, whereas the analysts and associates, they have to pay a price.
Yeah.
It might be changing now. The Wall Street Journal just did a article on the Bank of America where one of the associates died.
Yeah.
Working 100-hour weeks or 120-hour weeks. And
they're not just working, they're over caffeinated. They're using other stimulants,
drugs. And so that's probably more of a factor of your generation than mine. I think my generation might have taken different types of stimulants, but your generation is very overstimulated in a lot of different ways. And so that probably definitely added to what happened to that poor guy. But the reason that these people do that, these associates and work these insane number of hours, is because they want to create riskless wealth. Okay. They want to have an investment banking career. So they put in 120 hours a week because they know that if they make the cuts and do the job and perform with a decent level of, satisfaction, that they'll make $300,000, $400,000, $500,000. They'll get the bonus that might equal their salary. They might be in the $1 million, $2 million, $3 million range 5-6 years after. That's pretty good money.
Yeah.
But it's riskless. So if you want to make that kind of money elsewhere, you need to take a risk, which is usually an entrepreneur. And in order to do that, you've got to start a company. You got to put your own wealth at it. You've got to work, crazy hours.
Yeah, still work the same hours, but not with the guarantee.
But not with the guarantee that you're going to get that. And so a lot of people, especially in the Ivy Leagues, they don't want to take the risk. And that's a big problem. And so these people who do it on Wall Street, okay, go for it, right? I'm all, if that's the way you want to spend your life.
Mm-hmm.
But I would think that if you're going to work that hard, try doing something on your own.
Yeah.
Take the risk and create something, especially now when so many opportunities exist in tech and other areas that you can work that hard and you can have your own business. You can have your own life. You won't be working for somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah. I told my brother-in-law, actually, I don't have to say my brother-in-law, Nathan Torgerson.
Oh yeah, Nathan. Yeah. Okay.
So he's my brother-in-law.
Okay. All right.
But he has just put in the hours at his company. He's been there 5 or more years at this point, and he's the head of operations for this candy manufacturing plant.
Oh yeah.
Down in Utah County.
Yeah.
And I've told him several times, like, man, Nate, if you just put in that kind of work at the thing, at something else that you owned, like, you'd be a millionaire. Because he's putting in all these hours, and even at home, he's thinking about, like, oh, what can I do? And they have a whole sales team, but he's doing some sales on his own, like going out to, create these other relationships with other businesses that they can sell to. And, he does all this extra work. And when I think of an operator, like, well, that's Nate. If he just had his own thing, if he took the risk rather than working for a company, if he took the risk and he owned his own thing, like,
well, Nate ought to join up with, if Nate is so inclined. Not everybody's so inclined, but if someone wants to start a company or create a startup, they've said that your chances of success double or triple if you find a good partner.
Yeah.
And so if Nate or you or some find someone that can be in the saddle with you,
mm-hmm.
balancing your ideas and your efforts. That's the way to go. But if you try to do it on your own, that can be very difficult.
Yeah.
From what I've heard.
Yeah, I think there's more we could say there. Like with this podcast, it's basically a second full-time job for me, and I'm doing it all on my own at this point. But I'm also 2 months in.
Okay.
So it's not that crazy. But I think there's definitely things that I could outsource.
Right. You could have a partner and help you out.
It would be great to do. Right. But yeah, I would love to see him succeed. Probably not with me because I've never even worked in the physical product space. And he's only done physical products. I mean, logistics, supply chains. I'm like, I have zero experience in that sort of stuff, and it's just kind of funny being in all these other MBA classes. They're like, I thought I was a smart guy, but I am realizing I have zero experience in so many things.
It's very complex. That world is very complex.
It is, yeah, and I think he does it very well. And thinking about risk, so I want you to think about the founders of any company. Let's say someone has a company, they're growing, they're building this thing. At what point does it make sense to take on financing? Because in my mind, financing is risk. But when, as you are advising on so many different boards and for these different companies, when have you recommended, like, yeah, we need to find funding for this? Can you give me an example of when you recommended someone find funding?
The answer to that question is different for everybody. Let's say you're doing a startup and the startup requires financing from the get-go because it's a scale startup. Well, then you need to recognize that you're going to give up a lot of ownership. And so that's always going to be the push and pull in a new company is how much is the owner willing to give up, mm-hmm. and how much IP are they willing to share? How much, are they willing to bring in outside voices to something that they feel very strongly has to be done a certain way?
Yeah.
So I don't think there's one answer for that question. And so I'm hesitant to say, but in terms of when to take financing, the answer is always when you don't need it.
Say more.
Okay, so if you're starting a company and you start getting a modicum of success, you start getting new customers, you're getting new distribution channels, and things are starting to really pop for you, and you think, wow, we can cover our costs and we can even grow based with our margins, mm-hmm. the way they are right now. We don't need financing. We'll just keep this going for as long as we can. And so owners typically are reticent to taking financing because they've already got a business plan that seems to be working.
The results are there.
The results
they
are
have
there.
proof of concept.
And so if you don't take financing, then when you do need financing, because typically when you do a startup or you have a new company, you're dependent on either one product or one customer. And if something goes wrong with that one product or that one customer, then you could be in the doldrums very quickly. And so if you take financing when you don't need it, when you're in a growth mode or you have momentum on your side, then when you do hit hard times, and you'll have a cushion there that you can fall back on. That could be a line of credit. It could be venture financing. It could be, that venture financing could come in the form of preferred shares. It could come in the common shared. It could be a number of different formats, but you'll at least have the cushion so that when the business model is tested or tried, you'll be able to have a way to work through that without having to liquidate the company.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think of another student who I can tell you afterward, but they've been involved in several business ventures, startups of their own and startups of others, and they frequently run into bad luck where the businesses don't work out. And it seems to me, I was never involved, but it seems to me from hearing the stories like, well, you chose to operate this business model that was reliant on low interest rates. And then the environment changed and you no longer have low interest rates and you didn't plan for that environment. So it seems like it wasn't bad luck,
It could be so many things. It could be one customer, one product. You're probably talking about something that happened in 2022 when the interest rates went from, or at least the risk-free went from 2% to 4.5%, 5%, and all the other interest rates went up with it. So that was a systemic issue that occurred across the entire market. And I wouldn't be surprised if we have other systemic issues occurring in the world because, on Liberation Day, April 2nd this year, we saw a massive shift in policy around the world. And I think you'll continue to see that from this president. And so if you've got a business model that's working, don't count systematic issues from your business plan because they could disrupt you very quickly. I mean, I know how many manufacturers of hard goods do you know that have been disrupted because the supply chains out of China have all changed or at least been put at risk?
Every one of them?
Every single one of them, right? Yeah. And it went from a night to day on April 1st, it was one way. And on April 3rd, it was a completely different way, or at least a different feel. And that's all, of course, being worked out. And
right. The Supreme Court recently struck down most of the tariffs that everyone was so worried about.
Yeah. So there's going to be some messiness as this is all implemented, but that confusion and that messiness stops commerce, and that stops sales, that stops your supply chains. And so all of that confusion, a confused mind says no. And so when you have all this confusion, people just slow down their purchases and investments and risk taking. And so that's what I think we're seeing right now. And there could be other things looming on the horizon, as you were just telling me previously, some of the things you're reading in the Wall Street Journal this week and last.
Yeah. I think it's just tough for me I have sympathy for the situation of like, oh, now how are you going to put food on the table? Totally get that. That's tough. I've lived that life a time or two where like, hey, things are going to be financially tight for us for a while, between growing up and then, my adult life. I think everyone at some point, maybe not everyone, but most people at some point have a concern about money. But where I don't have as much sympathy is like, wow, the business isn't working because you guys didn't plan for anything except for the situation that's, just so rose-colored glasses and like just so optimal that you happen to be in for 2 years.
But it's like, so hard as an entrepreneur who's trying to make decisions day to day, and the business is pivoting 3 or 4 times in a year, and to say, okay, I'm going to plan out for the tariffs that might be coming on Liberation. I mean, those things are just out of the realm of sometimes these guys. And so I have a little bit of sympathy. That's why I say, if your business is going well, you've just started the company, and it's not a tech startup, well, then look at getting a line of credit.
That's when you get the cushion.
If it is a tech startup, well, then maybe talk to some venture capital down this, we got plenty of them here in Utah that could probably help out.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, different business models have different requirements,
Mm-hmm.
and that's totally another conversation. But it, yeah, I lose a little bit of sympathy where it's like, well, you just didn't plan for the rainy days because the rainy days happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And they know it's going to happen. It's just tough to, as a business startup to plan all that.
Yeah, it's tough to set money aside rather than just keep feeding the engine.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I want to talk a little bit more about your time as a professor, and so I have something that I assume I know the answer to this question, but you've had all these fancy titles: CEO, board of directors, owner of your own business. Do you do some consulting through? Which of these roles has been the most fulfilling for you?
It's hard to say
Hmm.
where you get the most fulfillment. I mean, when I was at NASDAQ and I was going through this massive change in my life and all these growth changes, if you had asked me at that moment, are you fulfilled? Okay, I would have said no. I want out of here.
Yeah.
And but then looking back at it, that was probably some of the most career defining experiences that I had that were absolutely required for me to take it to a different level. And so was that fulfilling? Absolutely. Especially as I look back at it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, at NASDAQ I was the vice president, then senior vice president, and then CEO of NASDAQ Dubai. And all three of those were fulfilling in different ways. And then, when I was in the Middle East and I was CEO of different firms, there was a certain joy that comes out of serving those different capacities. When if you try to do a good job as a manager and you're turning the business around, for example, and you see people's lives change, or you see people attain goals that they've never thought they could do that were possible for them,
Mm-hmm.
that's very fulfilling. Or if you see the board happy that their company is starting to make money again, where they didn't think that growth was possible, that's very fulfilling.
Mm-hmm.
And then those people go home and they've got a job and they've got way to put food on the table because of some of the decisions and the things that you're doing to enable that. When you're a professor, it's a very different world because you're not running a business. You're not trying to create results that that create value for the market. You're trying to help individuals who will then be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But what I learned early in my mid 40s through this experience that I shared earlier was helping people is helping people. So if I'm helping a person with their goals and there's a mixture of family and or personal and professional goals, but they all lead to an individual becoming a better person and performing at a higher level, that's not too different than sitting with a student and helping them think differently and seeing the world in a way that would help them be better prepared for their career.
Mm-hmm.
And so the same goals that make you, I think, a good manager and a leader would also make you a good professor.
Yeah.
If as long as the focus is on the individual, and the individual isn't the means to an end, but the end in and of themselves. And when people feel that they are the end, they feel like they are the reason, they perform at a much higher level,
Mm-hmm.
whether in business or in education. So I would say that I think you say fulfillment, I would probably I think the better word is joy. The joy that you feel in your career is equal as long as the goal is the same. And in my opinion, the goal should always be about the individual.
So
The
with
person.
the goal being the individual, between your time as a professor and your time at your professional career, every class that I've had from you, you talked about communicating through frameworks. When did this idea of frameworks come into your mind as you're considering how you communicate with other individuals?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now we're talking about communication
Mm-hmm.
and business communication and how to talk to an executive, how to talk like an executive. Executives have a certain way that they want to hear things, and it sort of was a growing understanding of mine through the years as I was learning at SAP, and I observed how the management team and the directors, they communicated with each other, and I'd watch in awe how some of the senior vice presidents and vice presidents at NASDAQ, not at NASDAQ, but at SAP, could just talk the language in a way that I couldn't. And I thought, how do I get to that level? How do you get to be an individual who can connect all the dots and help move the deal towards a close?
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't figure it out there. And then when I went to NASDAQ and I started to watch Bob Greifeld, the CEO there at the time when I was there, he was a true executive, and he spoke in bullets. He was able to summarize. He was able to capture things, take the complexity out, decipher it down, and then put it back in a very simple way that everybody would resonate, and then say, "Oh, why didn't I say it or think of it that way?" Right? And that was the person that I really admired, his communication ability. You just always understood what he was saying.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized it was because he spoke very, very simply. And
so sometimes I'm sure you were like, that's what I just said, but I took 2 minutes to say it, and he took 30 seconds to say it, but he chose the right words.
He chose the right way to say it. And so that I had a really negative experience with Bob once, and I was preparing him for a meeting with one of my clients, and he just needed to know. And it was a bit of a time crunch that we had to get some stuff done in a very short amount of time. And he looked at me and he said, "Jeff, you're confusing me." And then he turned to my associate, Jordan, and said, "Jordan, bring me up to speed." Jordan just bam, 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 brought him up to speed.
And you were the VP?
I was the VP and he was the associate. And that was just embarrassing. And it took me about a day to come to this point, the point that I said, I need to learn to communicate differently. And so I made it a strong point that I was going to learn how to communicate in a way that he understood. I wasn't framing it, communicate like an executive. I just want to be in a position. And so that meant is that I had to prepare more. It meant that I had to simplify all my communications to what was really important and decipher out what didn't need to be said. And so when I started to do that and practice it and prepare harder, I realized that preparing was as important as actually communicating to get all the bullets down. Mm-hmm. And so that became a game changer, that conversation he had with me when he said, "Jeff, you're confusing me." And being able to say, I need to start communicating with others differently. And so that's when I started to model Bob Greifeld and say, what does he do? And I noticed that I didn't get the framework idea from Bob, but I got the story idea when I noticed as I modeled him for a period of 3 or 4 months and just took copious notes on everything he did.
You were kind of stalking him a little bit.
I did more than that. Any chance I could get to be around Bob, I would just observe what he was doing, what he was saying, how he would prepare, everything. I wrote everything down because he was, for lack of a better word, he was my model. And after a while, I realized when we went to meetings and he would be in a meeting with an executive and they would say, "Tell us why we should be on the NASDAQ and not the New York Stock Exchange." And he wouldn't tell them why. He would just tell them a story. And I went, he's telling a story? Why would he be telling a story? That makes no sense.
They didn't ask for a story.
They didn't ask for a story.
The reasons they should be here.
They wanted the bullet points on why they should stay on the NASDAQ. And I said, okay, I didn't understand it. I said, but it works for Bob. I'll do it myself. And I started telling stories instead of just answering the question directly. And what I learned from that was as soon as you say, once upon a time, okay, as soon as you begin the beginnings of a story, you'd better have a good story because people are going to listen. Mm-hmm. Because people are we're wired to love a good story.
Did Bob say once upon a time?
No.
Was that his thing?
No. And so what we did was And what he did was it was always a good story. But I realized that a CEO telling a story, they've got a platform of 20 minutes. A vice president has a platform of about 2 minutes to maybe 5 minutes. So as soon as you start telling a story, you've got to be able to condense it and tell it quite well in a short amount of time. Anyway, when I did that, I realized that if I had somebody's attention, what I say better be worth saying.
Yeah.
And they better.
And what year was this?
This was probably 2004, 2005.
Okay, sorry to interrupt because you're right in the middle of your story, but I feel like this is so much more important for, this generation, for my generation in 2025, where you can be telling, oh, I know that I need to communicate in a story, but we have 30 seconds, but before someone's attention goes to something else, because all of us are just, scroll next thing, scroll next thing.
Yeah, but we still like a good story.
We do, but you have to get someone's
Netflix
attention right away.
Amazon Prime and the whole Hollywood machinery is testament to the fact that we want a story.
We do. We want a story.
But when you're scrolling on social media, you're trained to go really quickly, and you're not gonna watch a story. But when you turn on your Netflix or when you go to a movie theater, you're gonna watch a story because you want you want to be immersed. You want to take an emotional bath. Now that's not business, but there is a need to tell a good story and a good narrative, especially if you're a startup CEO or if you're going to be in a new company. Why are you doing? You got to have a narrative. There has to be a compelling why, and that compelling why or that narrative is a story. And you have to be able to tell it in such a way that you grab the attention of the people that are listening, that they say, yeah, I'll invest, or yeah, I'll buy from you.
Yeah.
That's still the case for a story. Now, to your original question on frameworks, which is a little bit different. Frameworks are how consultants speak. And that's how consultants earn the big bucks, is that they're able to take a very complex problem, conceptualize it, and then put it back in front of you, and you look at the complexity of the problem, and you say to yourself, boy, they really made that easy, and I can see it on one page in a graph or in a picture or in some sort of framework like a 2x2 matrix or something, and it really makes sense. And I noticed that when we hired a consultant, we actually hired Bain consultants in the Middle East and to do a strategy work for us, and they came in and interviewed us, and they played back everything that we had said to them. And then when they made the executive presentation, it was everything that the employees had said. I'm not sure that they had put one original idea into there, maybe a couple, but to be fair. But what they did was communicate it expertly, so that when the board of directors was watching what they were doing, they were in awe. They were like, these guys are really smart. They know what they're doing. And I looked at what they had done, and I said, I can do that. Everybody should be able to do that. But what these management consultants are trained on is how to do that. They're trained how to take a complex issue, deconstruct it, conceptualize it, and put it in such a way that you look at it and say, I get it. Mm-hmm. And we have a path forward. You help clarify things that we hadn't seen before. Now, to be fair to management consultants, they also wallow in the data. They go deep into qualitative and quantitative data, and they take it all and they bundle it, but they bundle it in such a way that you understand it. I cannot tell you how many analysts I have had that have given me information that is just 30 or 40 or 50 pages deep. And I look at it and I think to myself, you haven't done your work. You haven't simplified this. You haven't taken the complexity and made it something simple that makes me and draws me to want to know more about this particular issue or this strategy or this.
So what those analysts should do is create this framework, which would be a distillation of those 30 or 40 pages, so you can understand the main idea. It may be 30 or 40 pages is a lot of data.
Yeah, it's a lot of data. But if you can take that and you can put it down into 3 or 4 pages, and those 3 or 4 pages are high bandwidth, then all of a sudden you're looking at something that, says, this person's really smart. This person has a level of competence that makes me want to know more from them. because they were able to take something difficult and make it understandable. That's sort of the key skill set of a chief information officer, a tech guy at a firm. That's why they're always revolving in these revolving doors, is because they don't speak the language of the executive. And if they learn how to speak in that same language and they can cross both worlds, then they're very successful in getting their technology implemented at a company. Well, the same thing is for an analyst who's got reams of data. They've got to be able to cross that world and be able to communicate it in a way that the person goes, yeah, I think I'll implement that. And so we don't spend, and I think this is going to be one of the new skill sets of the 21st century with AI, is being able to communicate in a way, because we can go from the problem to the solution exceedingly fast now. Mm-hmm. We can go, especially in finance, to do a discounted cash flow. I can take all the company financials and I can, with a few prompts, upload the financials and have a DCF that will give me a fairly high value, quality discounted cash flow analysis. And then I can look at the multiples and I can get what might have taken a week in a few hours. Okay. Mm-hmm. But the next, so what does that mean? Okay. So the next thing is, so if I can get there faster with AI, and we have to use AI because it's the new tool, right? Then the next steps are going to be, okay, Matt, you've just gone through from problem to solution. You've given me a good valuation on this company. What does this mean?
Yeah.
And so the key skill sets going forward in an age of AI with finance, or many careers, but let's just pick on finance for a second, mm-hmm. will be, can you reflect upon what you just distilled from the AI? And second, is it correct? Because AI always gives you an answer whether or not it's correct. It always puts out something.
It will hallucinate.
It will give you something. So that's why they say AI lies, but it will always give you an answer. So you'll get your answer, and you have to be able to reflect upon that. And then the new skill set, as far as being able to take that, is going to be observation. Is it right? What does this mean? What does this mean for us? How do we take action? And that's being able to look at it and observe. That's a lot harder, but that's a skill that you can learn. Mm-hmm. Then the next skill on top of observation will be, how well do you communicate it? Do you communicate it in such a way that either through a story or through a framework that this makes sense, so that you can garner everybody's respect and enthusiasm around whatever analysis that you've done, and able to go forward with it. And so, first it was the calculator, then it was Excel, and now it's AI. And AI is so much faster and so much more efficient that in finance, it's going to be our analyst. But now you're going to have to move into the role of vice president very quickly and say to your AI analyst, okay, what does this mean? What are we going to do with this now? And so observation and communication are going to be the new skill sets around AI in finance to get people to move to action.
And with that communication, how you communicate these ideas that you've observed, made some conclusions about, thinking more about the frameworks, can you tell me what a good framework is and what it is not?
A lot of people think a framework is a good, okay, let me start with what a good framework is not. It's, a lot of people put a picture up, or they'll put a box, fancy background, cool looking font, and say that's a framework. Or they'll put words in a triangle, and they'll say the bottom words are the most important, or the foundation, the top words are, the nirvana or whatever. Those are just pictures. Mm-hmm. Or they'll put steps with arrows, and they'll say step 1, step 2. Instead of putting it in a Word document, they put it in a PowerPoint slide, and they make this font 18 point instead of 12 point. and they put chevrons around it or something like that. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
That is not a framework, and that's what people think are frameworks. Okay, now
It sounds like you're describing an infographic. But
an
that doesn't make it a
infographic, but does not make it a framework because
frameworks are used for decision making.
Frameworks are used to facilitate a high bandwidth conversation around a complex topic. And that complex topic needs to be distilled into simplicity so we can have the conversation. And so if you can't take the complexity and put it in a framework so we can have a high bandwidth conversation, then you haven't done your job. If all you've done is put it in an infographic, you're making me do the work, which is fine. Maybe that's what I should be doing anyway. But if you're an analyst or if you're starting out in your career, that's your job. And so if you just put it in an infographic and say, well, you didn't like my framework, well, it's because you didn't do a framework, right? So you got to create the framework. And what I found is that you got to practice and taking all the different principles that are affecting the complexity or the parameters that affect the complexity, distilling them into what the most important parameters or principles are, and then being able to let them play off of each other. And so a famous framework, it's an off-the-shelf framework, is called the SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And that's used to create strategy for an organization. And it's not a bad one. I call it an off-the-shelf. A PESTLE framework lets you know, teaches you or sort of helps you think through if you're going to go international with a product. Not bad, but if you're in your company and you're trying to make specific decisions about complex problems that you're having, you need a custom framework that you create from whole cloth based on your principles, your parameters, and then putting that in a conceptual diagram that makes sense to your company, not something that's off the shelf. Now, sometimes we do graphs. We take revenue over time and we show how revenue has grown or net profits have grown or operating income or something like that. That's fine. But everybody does that. You can ask your AI, create me a graph taking, Microsoft's last 10 years numbers and compare it to Google or Facebook or someone like that, and they'll create a great graph for you. So that's not what I'm talking about as a graph. I'm talking about saying, let's say you're the state of Utah and you want to create a toll road between Payson, Utah and Salt Lake City.
I've heard this one, I think, 3 times from you.
3 times, okay? But I love the example because it's a very complex issue. If the state of Utah were to entertain the idea of creating a toll road, what are the considerations? It'd be a very complex problem. What kind of construction costs would there be? What kind of environmental considerations would there be? How much would you charge? What kind of taxes would you have to offset there? So you'd have to take all these considerations. And if you're going to have a high bandwidth conversation about creating a toll road or not creating a toll road between Payson and Salt Lake, how do you facilitate that? And so if you can put that into a framework where you can see the entire set of issues in front of you, then the analyst's job is to facilitate that conversation, because ultimately it's going to be the governor or it's going to be, someone else besides an analyst who's making that decision. And so those extra steps are very, very hard to do. And also if you try to take that information, if you were to put all the information I just said, should we build a toll road between Payson and Salt Lake City, and create a framework in AI, and let's say you prompted it perfectly, I can almost promise you right now, you will not get anything you need.
I have tried to get AI to build me frameworks, and either I'm terrible at prompting or AI cannot do it.
It's not there yet. It might be at some point, but right now it's not. And maybe there'll be an AI specific prompt or a framework tool at some point in the future, but right now it doesn't exist. And so the trick is, how do I use my great brain or your great brain to conceptualize it? And the reason McKinsey and Bain and management consultants are paid so much extra is because that is a skill set that is very difficult to learn, but once mastered has a high premium in the marketplace. And so it's worth learning, and it's worth everybody learning, and everybody can learn it. It's not reserved for the few. It's something that everybody can develop.
It's tough to put that on a resume, But when you see someone, you notice like they communicate so clearly, just verbally, and then every presentation I've ever seen from them is just so concise and like, oh, that makes so much sense. It is this and it is not that. I think frameworks are a great way of distilling the most important aspects of a concept and not even bringing into the conversation gray area.
And it demonstrates competence of the individual who does it.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives confidence to the people on the other side of the table that the person they're dealing with is a competent individual.
Yeah.
So it becomes a very powerful communication tool.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I think it's 6150. One of the classes I've had with you, we had to do this presentation. We all had to create a framework in order to present our investment portfolio and how we did and the decisions we made throughout the semester in our little groups, and presented it to the whole class. And Levi and Dan, who are both in that class, they had never met me, but they heard me present and they heard my framework, which I wasn't in love with, but I thought this is a fine enough framework and I don't think Jeff's going to fail me. We'll get through it. And of course I practiced and I went through a couple iterations of the framework, but they saw me present that and they saw the framework itself and they liked it so much. They both have, separately, not even together, even though they're friends, they both separately have remarked on that more than once. And now I've had both of them on this show talking about, their careers and the businesses that they've been involved in. And it was because of their perceived competence of me that I was able to demonstrate through, your class. Like that is the reason that they, both became guests on this show. And at some point I may be able to tap into them, for some business venture or, some sort of partnership.
Well done on that.
It works. Thank you for teaching me.
It works. Oh, of course. But it works, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
It really was just that ability. And I don't think I did an incredible job, but I did a good enough job where they thought that stands out to me. I need to talk to that guy.
Yeah.
And they talked to me after class, when we presented that day, and now they've been on the show and, we're all friends.
Well, I can tell you right now, I'm teaching 6150 this semester, and I've rearranged the class a little bit to bring in frameworks earlier. Usually I introduce it mid-semester, and this time I did it right at the beginning and said we're going to practice it all semester. We're going to reflect and communicate on all the assignments and practice on creating a framework. Mm-hmm. And it is by far the hardest thing that the students are doing. Getting the finance and learning how to do a discounted cash flow or a weighted average cost of capital or do financial analysis, risk reward, all the things that we do, pricing of debt.
Yeah.
That can be learned fairly.
Anyone can figure that out.
Everyone can figure that out. But what they're all struggling with uniformly is, well, how do I communicate this? And how do I glean observations about it? And learning how to observe, then communicating it are the two skill sets, at least two skill sets in a new AI-driven world. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I try to teach in my classes.
Yeah, I think there's no shortage of data. There's no shortage of calculations to be done. But what do we do about that? What do we conclude from it? And then how do I communicate that to you in order for you to make a decision? Or for you to purchase something from, whatever it is. I think the ability to communicate done through frameworks a lot of the time is becoming so critical.
And stories.
And that's why I started the podcast, really, because I think these real stories from people about your time at NASDAQ and SAP and how you realized, I think I might be the problem.
I say that more often than you realize.
And I think we all need to say that, but that's one of the reasons why I started this podcast. AI will provide all the information you will ever ask for, but the stories that it comes up with will either be historical or, imaginary. They're not real. Mm-hmm. But to hear it from your mouth and you say, well, I was having these issues at home that I'm not necessarily going to get into, but also having these issues in my career that, I'll talk through that a little bit more. And all these things were happening at the same time. And I realized I think I might have a problem in the way I communicate. To hear you say that, I think it means a lot to me, and I think it means a lot to someone out there who's going to watch this as well.
Well, it was not just to clarify that. I think I might have a problem to communicate. That was like a subset. I had a whole EQ issue that I had to go through and figure out that
Mm-hmm.
people really matter. People are not the means, people are the ends. And the key, and this is going to go counter to good business practices, but or at least what common business orthodoxies out there, patience on people is critical. They just, we all make flaws. We're all doing mistakes. We're all saying stupid things. And what people need is patience, of kindness, and of a willingness to say, I'll help you work through these issues.
Mm-hmm.
And where I don't have patience is when I see people either rebelling or they're arrogant or maybe they're just misfit in a role, right? You have a person that wants to be in sales that probably is better in operations or vice versa. Then you just try to help them and move into the right position as soon as you can.
Mm-hmm.
But when you see you've got a good fit with an individual, and I didn't get that. I just thought it was about the results. And so the results kept me in my job and it kept me going, but it didn't get me promoted. And that was the difference.
Well, speaking about people and getting promoted, these results are obviously important. And I see so many of my peers who are, they have bachelor's degrees or now have MBAs or other master's level degrees. They struggle to get jobs after graduating. How can these young professionals stand out in today's world?
Well, I think going back to what we said before, there's got to be a reason for me to hire you. And that's why the narrative matters. And so if you're just looking for a job, eventually you'll probably get one. It's a numbers game. You just keep trying. Eventually something will happen.
Sure.
But if you're trying to find a really good fit with a company, it takes a lot of research. It takes a lot of networking. It takes a lot of, value checking to see if the values of the company match up with the values I have as an individual. And when you get to that point of saying, okay, this would be the kind of company that I think would be really great for me, or I'd be great for them, then be able to communicate in the interview or the conversation you're having with whoever about the passion or the purpose that you would bring to that role. And so often it's just, they go and they show up. And I cannot tell you how many interviews that I've conducted where people, they do a little bit of homework, but they haven't really gone through the hard work of checking with other individuals in the organization, of checking on my background. You used to work at SAP. Okay, great. You looked at my LinkedIn profile. But, just really saying, does this align with me? And then being able to craft a narrative that makes you so compelling that I'd be completely remiss if I didn't at least give you a second shot or a second interview.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes a lot of work. The other thing is that if you really want the job you want, you have to network.
Yeah.
It's not going to be on a job board. It's going to be through networking. And networking, I've found, that's work. And if you treat it as anything else, if you treat it as sort of a side thing that you do, then I think you're missing the picture.
And what does successful networking look like?
Successful networking is serving. It's being outwardly focused. So you're at an event and you're talking to somebody.
So I'd say step one, go to an event. If you see a flyer for like a company or some other organization's event,
or the state of Utah sponsoring something or a company sponsoring something, and you go to that event. You have to be out there.
Yeah.
You have to be talking to people, right? So I guess that would be a step one.
Never rub shoulders if you're not near any shoulders.
Yeah, I guess I assume that. and being able to, the most important or the most interesting person in the room is the person you're talking to, not yourself. But it's so tempting to say, well, I can do this, or I've got this skill set, or I could help you do that. instead of really finding out who that individual is and what kind of competency they have. And then having the courage to stay in the conversation if that person may not be able to be a good fit for you.
Mm.
Meaning that sometimes, it's like, well, I'm going to network, therefore, can this person help me?
And once you realize, I don't think they can, you stay.
I get out of the car.
Right?
Most people will just get out of the conversation. And so as a result, they're standing there with a drink in their hand, or they're standing, and they're always looking around. And so they're not present with you when they're talking with you. And you're just like, I can't tell you how many people they're just like, okay, they realize that I can't help them. Therefore, I'm of no value to them. Therefore, they got to get out of the conversation as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
I have no time for those people. I don't care if they're financially, far richer than I am, or they have a bigger position in another company. If I find the sideways glances and they feel like, they have someone more important to talk to than me, I typically will get out of the conversation as quickly as I can, just because I just want to get to know you, and everybody has value. And I found that in my networking events, that when I really treat people like individuals and not like commodities or as tools to help me get what I want, that engaging that conversation and establishing a real relationship usually ends to a place where I will get to the right person.
Yeah, everybody knows somebody, right? Even if they're not the person that you think you need, they know somebody.
And if they like you and they believe you're genuine, then they're more likely, they might have something in the back of their mind they're not telling you because they think you're a tool, or they're using you as a tool. And so I found that just be present with the individual you're with, get to know them. They're worth getting to know just because they are a person. Right? And if you can go with that mentality. And then the second thing is, after you sort of establish some sort of relationship of trust, and you feel like it's okay, then just talk to them like they're your friend, and see if there's an opportunity to go forward in some way, whether that's opening up a door or setting up a meeting or something like that. Just see if there's a way. And if they can't, and there is even a small rapport, ask them for recommendations of friends that they could maybe introduce you to. If they believe that you're a genuine individual, then you say, well, is there anybody else I could talk to that you might know of? Right? And if you can get one or two names from that individual that you're talking to, maybe it's a dead end for any number of reasons.
Yeah. Then
you can move on, and if they like you and you've established a relationship, then you can sort of take it to the next step. And if as long as you're doing that and establishing genuine relationships, then people will gravitate towards you, and eventually something will happen.
Yeah, that's what I found to be true. I've been the person, I've gone to some networking events, and me thinking, I only have 20 minutes here because I have to go after this, whatever my obligations are. I can only speak to the people who are going to help me get the thing I want. I've been that person who, mid-conversation, you're not who I thought you were. You do something else. Well, hey, it was nice to meet you. I'm going to go, do some laps around the room. I've been that person.
You've been there. Everybody's that person, it feels like sometimes, right?
And I got nothing out of it. And they probably got nothing out of it too, other than realizing, he didn't want to talk to me.
Right.
But then these other times where, like, if you just get to know people and show off who you are, be interested in who they are, and form, some real connections, then stuff happens.
Yeah.
Even if it takes some time, if people like you, there's a saying that people do business who they like with, people do business with people they like. So if you just get people to like you and like people in return and make that genuine, not some sort of, manipulative thing. If you can just actually turn yourself into someone who enjoys relationships, sort of like the change of heart you said you had to have, where like, I really need to start caring about people, things just work out.
Differently.
Yeah.
And better.
Yeah, way better.
In the Arab world, they don't have the rule of law. the rule rests with the leader of the country. So it's a bureaucratic form of government, or they call in economic circles a bureaucracy. And so they call them the sheikhs.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes in Utah they say sheik, but it's sheikh. In China, it's the prime ruler, Xi Jinping. So they have these, and so it's always about getting to know the individual, because the rule of law isn't, you don't know how the rule of law is going to be administered in those countries, or the law is going to be administered. It's always based on an individual. But in the United States, we really do have a good system of rule of law. It's not perfect, but it's by and large the best system in the world. And so we don't necessarily think that relationships are as important as they might in the Arab world, because in the Arab world, where it's just the relationship they have, if they're going to do business, because the contracts don't mean as much, because they don't know if their laws are going to be upheld. And if it goes to court, they don't know if it'll ever be settled.
Yeah.
And so I'm not going to do business with somebody that I don't trust or I don't like. So relationship is everything there. And if you can establish that relationship with those individuals, you'll have a contract, but that won't be what binds the two companies or partnerships together. It will be the individuals who have a mutual respect and admiration for each other.
Yeah. It reminds me of, I was doing this assignment recently for my international finance class, and this is my last semester in UVU's MBA program. But I was doing this assignment, and we were supposed to write down 5 things that Apple could do, and there was more to it than just this. But this piece of the assignment was write down 5 things that Apple could do to mitigate the effect of tariffs. And one of them that I wrote down was Tim Cook should make some sort of investment venture with Trump real estate, holdings or something like that. Like maybe that, because they got an exception on smartphones, a couple days after some tariffs were announced. And you don't think that there were any sort of backdoor phone calls or relationship, some influence because of their relationship? If they want to shore up the future of Apple, then maybe you make some business deals and, you play that relationship game there. Sure, they should also, move manufacturing to countries that are, less impacted by tariffs, or bring things back to the U.S. There's all these legitimate business things they can do, but you can't discount that people are the answer here. And if you just get Trump on your side a little bit, then maybe you get an exception on your products. And
I think that's I think what you're talking about there is a business relationship versus a personal relationship. And President Trump, of course, likes the business relationships,
right? And
that works out really well for him. And I think for many people, we do business together, we just start to like each other more, and things work out. But if you can get to that level where it's a personal relationship, where you really care about each other's families or their interests, then you've taken it to a different level. And if it truly is about that individual, I mean, there are people who are in normal sales jobs and that sell cars or that sell retail or that sell, and they really get to know their people and they treat them really well. Those people make a lot of money over their careers, and they have very fulfilling careers, because it's all about the personal relationship, and people trust them, and when you build that level of trust, that is the highest form of power, the relationship with an individual, and so it supersedes the rule of law. And so when I'm glad I learned my hard lessons earlier in my career. I guess earlier in my career, early 40s. Is that early?
Early to some.
Early to some, late to others. I'm glad I learned that, at least at that point, that it enabled me to sort of readjust, because it really is about the relationships that you have with people. Yeah,
speaking a little bit more about the relationships with people. So a friend of mine, he owns this mobile oil change, mobile tire repair, replacement, sort of mobile minor auto service company. And he has a couple of vans. He services some fleets for companies. And then he also, he came to my house and did my brakes. One of his guys did my brakes. So that's sort of his operation. And he was actually my first guest here. And he told me about how one of the fleet managers that he was working with, she was having her retirement party, and he was going. Like he's just a vendor for them, but he was able to. He just loves people. He loves building relationships, and he was able to build this relationship where he got the invite. Like, hey, do you want to come to my retirement party? Like, it's been great working with you, and you service all of our trucks, every week. And I thought that was such a cool story. Like, you've known this lady for a year, maybe, and you built so much trust with her. You built such a great relationship that you got the invite to go to her retirement party with all the coworkers who she's known for 20 or 30 years. I think that speaks volumes to his character and just the way that he treats people. And I recommend his business to people all the time.
Yeah, I mean, especially in that kind of business where it's known to have a few shysters.
Yeah.
And for him to be able to say, because that's how a relationship is built, is on trust. And if he keeps doing consistently the right things for his clients, then he'll have a pretty big mobile business.
Yeah.
People come to him.
And he's growing, doing great, actually. And I, bringing back the finance element, since that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you, I wanted to get your idea on just kind of a back of the napkin valuation. I texted him and asked, like, hey, what numbers do you think you're going to do this year? That way we can just talk through. A lot of people imagine, what would it be like to own a business? Or what if I sold this business that I started? What would that be worth? What could this really look like? So for a small business, like, I see these kinds of little service businesses popping up all the time. So I think this would be very relevant to a lot of people. But his business is projected to do, we'll call it $600,000 this year.
Revenue?
Revenue, yeah, top line. And so if you were to assign, or how would you think about valuing this business before I say more?
Okay.
What questions would you ask?
Of course, it always depends on the industry and the growth rate and the risk associated with the cash flows. The easiest and the simplest and the starting point, sort of discounting everything I just said, okay, is multiples. So the business that's small, that's doing 600,000, which isn't bad. I mean, he's built it probably from nothing.
Right. He has, I think, 1.5 employees.
Right now. I mean, the fact that he's doing that is probably pretty good. You probably do either one or the other, a combination of the two of multiples. That's probably the first place you're going to start, is maybe two times, 1.5, 2 times revenue, maybe 5 times operating income or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know what kind of business he is, how many customers he's got, or what kind of, if it's products or services. You haven't given me any of that information, but it's just the place that most people start are multiples. Is it the revenue multiples, the EBITDA multiples, the operating income multiples? And then you take those multiples, and if it's a finance or insurance, it might be some book value multiples as well. And then you take those and you compare them to other companies and see how what their multiples are. So it'd probably be, in this instance, a little bit bigger company, a little bit more established. And so, if a bigger company had 4 times revenues, for example, he couldn't do that given the size of his company. So you have to scale that back a little bit. And the same thing with other multiples you were using. So that'd be the first starting point.
Yeah.
The second place that I would look at then is their cash flow, and if it's a tech company, well, that's going to be valued based on the narrative, on the growth, and
which is the reality of tech companies.
The tech companies.
It is the narrative that is your multiple.
Right, and so that would be something that the venture capital firms get into at a different level, and they have a different way of doing an analysis. But if it's a hard good kind of company, then I would look at you could do a simple DCF. You'd have to get your WACC, and that'd probably be your true opportunity cost on that.
And to define these for my mom, who's going to listen to this episode.
Yeah, okay.
A DCF is
a discounted cash flow. So you look at their cash flows, and you say, how much are those cash flows worth into the future? And so if it's creating, in your friend's company, let's say he's got $100,000 EBITDA, and you believe that cash flow is going to grow 100,000, 150,000, 190,000, 300, 350 or whatever, then you take those cash flows into the future and you say, well, that's what the company's worth. It's worth how much it can generate over its lifetime.
Right.
And you can't go too far in the future. You know, actually we can, but those assumptions make the valuations a little bit high.
Yeah. I mean, by the math you can, but it doesn't really
By the
make
math
sense.
you can. You can model anything out on a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to model that out, you'd say, okay, I'm going to look at 5 years of their cash, and then I'm going to say, well, what is that 5 years worth in today's dollars? If I could bring it into one big number, and that becomes, you subtract your debt and your preferred or whatever, subtract your debt, and then you say, okay, what is that worth? And is that worth for me to buy? And that'd be a second way. I'd be a little bit hesitant to use the discounted cash flow method with a company that is not established, that doesn't have an operating history.
Yeah. I mean, he purchased the company a year and a half, 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Last year, working through the early growing pains of, buying it from someone who wasn't really involved. They did 280 of revenue, and now we're on track to do 600 this year.
So he's got, okay, it's good.
I mean, he's hustling. He's working long hours, and he's
good for
really
him.
building it.
Good for him. That's great.
Yeah.
Stay with it. But if he wants to sell it, it feels like, just again, not knowing the industry, it feels like a little bit premature unless he was going to.
He's not trying to. I just thought this might be a fun little
exercise. Yeah. So, I mean, but even then he might need to do it because he might want to create a partnership. And he's got to give maybe a certain portion of his equity over, or he's got to buy a portion of equity from somebody else if they wanted to make the business stronger or grow faster. And so then you'd need to have a valuation. And there are a lot of firms that do private company valuations, and they're most likely going to take some sort of multiple approach until the company has a stable set of cash flows that. And it becomes more of a going concern or a forever company, as people call it. And when it's a going concern, then the DCF probably becomes a little bit more applicable.
Yeah.
And then if it becomes super stable, then you can use dividends and all that stuff. But that's way beyond.
Right. Yeah. Way beyond where he's at right now.
Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's kind of what I was looking for. Like, without seeing the spreadsheets or anything. I think it's kind of fun to think about, like, what is your company worth today? If you do 600,000 in revenue, subtract the debts, not add the multiple, but multiply whatever is left by some multiple that we contrive by looking at what do these similar companies sell for? What point in the business cycle do we think you're at, and how consistent do we think these revenues are? How stable are these? That's kind of what I was looking for. So you did great there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Because I think a lot of people, they dream of entrepreneurship, but assuming there will also be an exit at some point, they maybe don't understand how to value their business. Because some people I'll just be done with it, and they just shut it down. When really they could have sold the business, and they could have had a massive, multi-million-dollar exit, but if you have this, blue collar services company, like, it is worth something, Oh,
of course, starting a business is hard.
Yeah.
And I have the utmost respect for anyone who can start and grow a business, because it takes so much effort. There might be one or two examples where it's not, but for the most part, most people have to really work at it. And so people who do that, I believe the government should hold a special place for these entrepreneurs or these small business owners in terms of taxes and other bureaucratic considerations that enable them to grow and develop their business, because it is so hard.
Mm-hmm.
Most people just try to get a job.
Yeah.
So to create the job and to create the company, that's a different level of commitment and risk and understanding, and that I think that we as a people should roll out the red carpet for them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he is taking significant risk. The time that he could be spending with his family, opportunity cost there, the HELOC that he has on his house in order to fund the thing, at which he's paying down at this point. But
oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, so he's like real.
He's real.
Okay, that's like serious risk.
Yeah. Yeah, it was fun getting into it with him. But just kind of wrapping up with these finance ideas, I'm curious what your thoughts are. We've talked about retail investors before in your classes, and how would you describe the retail investor? What is that defined as?
Yeah, so I got introduced to this when I was at NASDAQ. And you have, when you think about investing in the stock market, and a lot of people want to make investments into Apple or Nvidia, some of these Meta, these hot tech growth companies. And sometimes they just don't make money. And they think, well, what did I do wrong? Or they see a stock going up quickly and they think, okay, I'll jump in now, only to jump in and then lose money. And so they have all sorts of horror stories that cause them to say, oh, I'm not going to invest in the stock markets. It's a gamble. And it's not. It's just that you're playing a game against some very sophisticated people who know the rules and have a different set of information than you have. They paid for that information that enables them to play at a higher level. And so we call those people institutional investors. And they're on Wall Street. They're part of sort of they have a communication methods, and they pay for privileged data that most of us don't have, and they literally sit all day monitoring these companies and events and how these events will affect these companies. And they act immediately on the news of the day. And then you have other people who are retail investors, your ma's, your pa's, your widows, your orphans, okay? And that's who the Securities and Exchange Commission has been set up. The SEC has been set up to protect. Are the people who just go into the markets casually. And those retail investors don't have the same information. And when you try to play against the institutional investors, if you think you can outsmart them, you might get a lucky trade here or there. But by and large, you will get crushed by the institutional investors. So if you're going to invest in the markets and that's going to be a part of your life, or you want to, get the returns out of, better than debt or CDs or something like that. And I think you should. The key there is to not try to beat the investor. It's just try to buy and hold. Just let the stocks, the S&P generally goes up over time on a compounded annual growth rate of about 10%. And so you can earn about 10% by putting your money and just leaving it there in a well-diversified portfolio.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. How can a retail investor reduce their risk?
First, there's a lot of different products that mimic the market. So you can buy the Spider Fund, which is SPDR, and that's a fund, or SDR, is that what it is? I can't remember the ticker symbol.
I mean, there's a whole bunch of them.
Yeah,
SPY, SPDR.
Yeah. So you can buy any one of these funds that mimic the entire market. And so if the S&P goes up, 3 points in one day, you'll make that 3 points because you own a product that mimics it. And the same thing, if it goes down, you lose the same amount. But that's the way you sort of try not to invest in individual companies. Now, if you're going to invest in individual companies, it should be either an industry you understand really well, or it should be a company you know really well.
I feel like you read my mind here, because this was a setup.
Okay.
Where I was going to say, how do you reconcile, recommending diversification with what Warren Buffett does, where he only invests in 40 different companies that he knows very well.
Yeah.
And it seems like you're going exactly where I hoped you would.
Okay, good. So when Warren Buffett invests, he investigates every single aspect of that company. So when he finally pulls the trigger and invests, like he did on R.C. Willey, he knew everything about the furniture company as well as the furniture industry and about how it could compete. And so that's knowing a company really well before you put your money into it. Now, it's a private company, so that might be harder for an average person to invest in. But if you're going to do that, know your companies extremely well, or know the industry. So if so let's say you work in Safeway or Albertsons or Walmart, and you know all about the retail, the fast-moving consumer goods, the food industry. get to know everything about that industry. And let's say you've worked at one of these stores for a while and you know how the vendor relationships work, you know how retail works, you know when they mark down, you just know everything about it. And you know why. Then you can buy those companies because you understand a lot about the company. Mm-hmm. Now, if you don't have that advantage, let's say, you know something about Qualtrics because you're here in Utah Valley and you know the owners and you know some of the things that they do in terms of doing analytical surveys and you just happen to be following them a lot. Well, that might be a good one as well to invest in. Mm-hmm. But don't think that you're going to beat the institutional investor by going into Apple and day trading that. You should probably be looking at that one just as a long-term buy and hold. And so diversify your purchases. So buy the index, or go with a wealth manager and ask them to diversify your portfolio, or know what you're really doing before you pull the trigger. And then even when you pull the trigger, hold it. Mm-hmm. Because you're competing against some very sophisticated individuals that have a lot more than you have.
Yeah. I have no interest in watching my stocks all day, every day, in order to make these little trades. Yeah. Like, oh, I can make $20 there if I, sell that really quickly and then get back in. I'm like, okay, well, these mutual funds or hedge funds or, any of these institutional investors, half a percentage point move for them means they're making millions, where a half a percentage point for me makes $20. Like, it makes no sense to try and game this, because we're not going to be beating these people who are professionals and who do it all day.
Yeah.
Even though I have plenty of friends and family who, love to talk, what's the hot new stock?
Right. Well, yeah, that's all. It's always fun. That's always the topic du jour, but be careful on that one for sure.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, this has been awesome. Thank you for sitting with me and, going through all these, lessons that you've had and, sharing so much of your life with the world now. If people want to get in contact with you, how can they do that?
LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Is probably the best way. I'm on LinkedIn, and they can look at my profile there, and I'm sure you can put it in the company, the biography note or the company notes, whatever. But thank you, Matt. I appreciate it. It's been fun talking. Yeah. Great questions. I should probably say that Matt Lurker is one of my star students.
Well, you don't have to lie to the people.
No, definitely not a lie. You did a great job in all the classes that I've had you in, and very thoughtful, very introspective, and really, really was a star student. And I look forward to watching your career over the next few decades, because I think you're going to make a great impact in the world.
I appreciate it. That's what I'm trying to do, make an impact. And I think, not to get on my soapbox again, but I really feel like this podcast is an opportunity to share so many insights. And like my cousins in Idaho or Montana or wherever, like they're not going to get to meet you and hear all these things from you. But if I can share your insights with them and, everyone else who listens.
If they can make it through this, this is a lot of Jeff Singer and Matt Lurker. You just got to, let's just put that out there at the beginning.
They got to come to like us a little bit. But if they can stomach that, there is, a little bit of value hidden between everything else.
Well, thanks, Matt. Appreciate the time.
Thank you, Jeff.